importantly, I would like to, okay, there we go. Okay, so I will start introducing, then Sasha and Naomi will take over, and we'll continue with a lovely conversation. And so allow me to introduce our lovely speakers. We'll start with introducing Ms. Kendra Kruger, who is a STEM Outreach and Education Manager and the Outreach and Education Director at the ASRC. So Ms. Kruger started as an electrical engineering at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Then she worked at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory and then followed a very interesting career at the University of Colorado, where she followed a Master in Science in electrical engineering as well. And then she took over this amazing effort into creating a lot of content for people that are interested in science, such as most of us here. And so she created a fantastic platform called For Love and Science. I highly suggest everyone to check it out. I will send the links and post the links at the end of the talk. So after that, she followed her career and joined the ASRC, where she serves as an Outreach and Education Director. Ms. Christine Stefano, who is an Administrative Coordinator at the Biology Department at the CCNY. She's also one of the founding member of the CCNY Women in Science, for which we are all very grateful for, and an advisor in the Biology Club. Stefano has a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master of Arts in Corporate Communication from Baruch College. She also happily always mentions the fact that she was a basketball player and then Director of Operations and Assistant Coach for a women's basketball team at Baruch. And as I said, she's doing fantastic efforts at the Women in Science organization and beyond. I think a lot of people know or heard about her and her amazing work. Dr. Pinar Ariata, who is an assistant professor at the Ariata lab at the ASRC in the neuroscience department. Dr. Ariata was born and raised in Istanbul. Well, she continued her undergraduate studies in Turkey. She also did a summer internship in at the German Cancer Research Center and Harvard Medical School. And then she decided to follow her passion in neuroscience and follow the PhD in a famous laboratory of Dr. Nathalian Heinz at the Rockefeller University, followed by a postdoctoral career in the laboratory of Dr. Arne Scheffler at Mount Sinai. And she recently took a role as a professor at the SRC, studying the role and specification of microglia in the brain. Beautiful work. She's been pioneering so many techniques, and now she's studying, she focuses her research on the epigenetic modifications of the functional and the function of microglia in Alzheimer's disease, and much more amazing science is coming from her lab. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, all good. Perfect. All right. So Dr. Ariata is also the recipient of a Women in Science Graduate Fellow Award, a Rockefeller University Graduate Fellowship, and the NIRSA, the Young Investigator Award. And it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And definitely not last but not least, Dr. Victoria Frey, who is a medical professor with tenure at the Department of Community Health and Social Medicine at the CUNY School of Medicine, where she also leads the Laboratory of Urban Community Health. I do have to apologize for our mishap of not mentioning that she is a full medical professor on Twitter earlier last week. It is very unfortunate that CUNY websites are not always up to date, and I sincerely apologize for that. We should have double checked several times, but I was very happy, and I think that was a very amazing exercise of what a strong woman does. Just acknowledges and like makes us all remember about their position, and that's how exactly we should all do. And so I really appreciate the correction and my sincere apologies once again. But Dr. Frey has been a fantastic researcher in her field since decades now. She led and designed a lot of research about HIV prevention and intervention among populations made vulnerable by HIV, to HIV by social system oppression. She developed fantastic papers and research work, solid work in prevention and a lot of aspects about the science of HIV prevention, with a particular focus on social system that I'm sorry, I think I'm cutting off. Oh, gosh.
We hear you. You're doing great.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Thank you. I heard some disconnections. I apologize. Well, it is again a pleasure to have all of you here. You are, as I said, all of you made a fantastic contribution to research and education so far, and we're all very excited to have you here and to continue to learn from you. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation once again. And Sasha, I turn it to you. Please carry on.
Thank you, Maruna, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sasha Solomon. I am part of CCNY WinS, and I'm also a recent graduate of CCNY. I graduated last year. So I will be the moderator for this event. I'll be asking the questions. If you have any questions to our participants, you guys can ask them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question. We do encourage that, but if you're uncomfortable, you could just use the chat. So we're gonna get right into it. We've actually prepared a few questions just to get the conversation started. We're gonna get right into it. So the first question is, now that we kind of have a good idea of your backgrounds and what you guys do, what do you consider to be the most interesting thing about your work? And what do you love that you do? So we can start with Dr. Ayada, since you're the first one I see, and then we can just go on over it. You guys can pitch in if you want. Go ahead, Dr. Ayada.
Of course, I was thinking about this question, and I love thinking about the question because one of the, I think for me, the most interesting thing is that we as scientists can ask, questions for which answer doesn't exist yet. And then we can, play around with molecules and cells and, just like, it's like a game, and then try to create, bring that information out there. So I find that the most exciting, and to have that flexibility and independency to ask crazy questions and then be able to design experiments to answer. What I love about, which I, having my own lab and having trainees in the lab, what I love most is, you put effort into giving what you have to people in the lab, and then they absorb, they receive, and then they kind of become their own with that information. So seeing that makes me, I love that part a lot.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Ms. Stefano, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you for asking. And I too will echo that. I love thinking about this question because I think it offers at different times of work, it makes you reflect on, why is it that we do what we do? So for me, I work with a lot of different people in a lot of different places. But if I were to capture like an umbrella theme, it's really seeing the journeys academically, professionally, personally. And I think that translates into what I really love. I love the human connections. I very early on was given a really wonderful piece of advice that has like helped carry me throughout my life, not just professionally, which is, really like who you're doing work with, because you could figure all the other stuff out, but if you can, find a team of people that you like serving and or working with or answering to, you'll find happiness along your own journey. And I think that that's proven to be true for me. So it's the human connections. I think they are so profound. And I'm at a point in my career now where I have people come back to me, no matter how big or how small of a moment it was, that I can say, I reflect upon that I've helped them, along their own journey that I can, see the difference that it makes. And so that's, really special.
Thank you so much. Dr. Fry, you're next.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I love these questions that make you sort of reflect. I think the most interesting thing about the work that I do, and I do a lot of team science, so I use the pronoun we when I describe our science, because it's just a team effort. And I'm on right now, the R01 that we just got is a 3-way MPI project. So it's always a we, but I think that, for me, what I find most interesting is the possibility of showing, so I do HIV prevention research. I focus a lot on anti-stigma interventions, anti-HIV stigma, anti-homophobia, and anti-racism. And we try to develop interventions that invite people to consider different ways of behaving and communicating that will result in less harm being done to the people that they love in their lives. And so one of the things that I like the most about it is this realization that people have, A, that they're potentially harming people in their lives, but B, that they can actually make some small changes in communication as they examine their belief systems, as their heart and their mind begins to move along this journey. But they definitely don't want to hurt people they love, so they can change some behaviors. And seeing that realization and seeing that happen is one of the things that I love the most. And that what I think is most interesting is that people can make those changes. We're cognitively capable of making these little changes. And so I think that's most interesting. And just to echo what Christine said, my father actually gave me advice, do what you love because you're going to do it the rest of your life. I was like, okay. Now, of course, you can change careers, you can change fields, but I did take that to heart. And I thought I really need to do work that I love, that I'm passionate about, because it asks so much of us. And if you don't have that passion and that commitment, and if it's not purpose driven, it's just really hard. I've seen people sort of fall apart. So.
Thank you. And Ms. Kruger, you were the last one. Go ahead.
Yeah, at my job, I get to run our youth and community programs at the Advanced Science Research Center. And the cool part about that is really being at the interface of lots of different communities. So I get to create these sort of access points where different folks get to talk that normally wouldn't. So getting scientists to talk to young people, but also getting community members into the scientific community to voice their opinions, also to help kind of guide where science research may go in the future, and to really have those voices be represented. And I think it's just, I really like that I get to be at these interfaces and get to hear these different perspectives and ideas with scientists, with community folks, young folks, also with artists, and really be at those sort of like interdisciplinary points where we can start to think about the world in different ways and sort of brainstorm these concepts of what the world can look like, or how these different and seemingly like disparate ideas can somehow inspire one another. I mean, even the Advanced Science Research Center itself is all about interdisciplinary research. So really, mixing chemistry, physics, biology together and seeing what all kinds of similar patterns exist in that space. And it's cool. In my position, I get to help sort of teach people how to tell the stories about these things, and really include more imaginative narratives that go along with what these things mean in a bigger picture, and how to connect them with simple things, or things in our everyday life that are connected to these more complex ideas. So it's just cool always getting to see those light bulb moments, not only for young people, but also for scientists, to realize something that even when a young person asks them a question and they're like, oh, wow, I never thought about that in that way. And now I have a whole new perspective of this thing that I had never thought about. So it's a really fun, I get to have a lot of fun. I get to ask a lot of stupid questions, which I feel like is one of my benefits in my job. I'm like, it's for the kids, so I get to ask all these silly questions to people. And also I feel like I'm sort of subversively also bringing in more of that playful nature into science. So I feel really lucky to be in the role that I'm in.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's one thing about teaching, is that you always learn as much from the students as they do from you. So that's very rewarding. Ms. Stefano, you have something to say?
I do. I wanted to add something, if I may. Ms. Kruger inspired me to think, I forgot to mention, I think most of us have different roles, multiple roles that we're in, and there's different things that are rewarding from those different roles. And one of my fundamental things that, if I were to go back to like what I teach, which I've co-taught science communications and I teach a communications background, through my work, I realized the importance of not only knowing what to say, but figuring out how to best say it to whomever it is. And that, I think, has really propelled all the different connections that I'm a part of. And I love the idea of that you shared, where there is this sort of playfulness that's really inspiring. And that's what made me think about this communications, because oftentimes people are fearful to speak up or communicate. And so I think that through my work with communications, it's really teaching people just that it's okay to have a voice. And that often will lead them to come back to me, because that's full circle with the thoughts that I was having. So thank you for inspiring me with that thought. And you can call me Christine, by the way.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for
I
that.
was just about
Yeah.
to ask that question. Can you discuss anything
Christine
again?
works.
Okay, so I can call you Christine. Is it okay if I refer to you guys by your first name as well? Okay, Dr. Ayala, your first name is pronounced Pinar?
Pinar, yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure I want to pronounce that right. Okay, it's always great starting off with this question, because when you ask someone what they're passionate about, you can really see how much they love what they do just as they're speaking about it. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. This next question is kind of just to pivot off the last one. Your career path, was it a linear one? Was it filled with twists and turns, where you transitioned maybe from one field to the next? Or was it linear? Or did you have an experience, if it was a person or who, that motivated you to pursue what you're doing right now? We can go in the same order if you want. We can start with Pinar. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about this, and my path was pretty straight, I would say, but there were, I had, their specific goals, but then, I just ended up on a parallel goal at certain times. There was one, so my first internship, I was in undergrad at the time, and I had no laboratory experience after sophomore year. And somebody I look up to, my dad's friend that I look up to, he basically said, don't go abroad to learn, to be in the laboratory for the first time. You just like learn it first, then go abroad by yourself. And that kind of really really pushed me to actually try to do this. So I guess somebody telling me that I can't do something makes me more, try harder, I guess. So that was one thing where for me, a lot of the career decisions kind of came very organic and kind of gut feeling. And it wasn't like what I planned for first, but they were more life bringing me to them. But yeah, I had pretty straight career. I started learning about science early. I decided about science early. Yeah, that's not much excitement there, but I did. I wanted to, for instance, one of the examples is that I wanted to go to Austria to do my undergraduate, and there I visited there, and I met the dean, and I kind of got a sense that it wouldn't be for me there. So that kind of they didn't make it seem like I was welcome there, let's say, and then that changed my decision to stay in Turkey for undergrad and then move abroad, basically.
Thank you. I'm sure we can all relate to when you said when somebody says you can't do this, you want to do it even more. Christine, you can go next.
Sure, and I'll just add to that, and I'm sure being women, we've all heard that. So I will share. I actually don't think I had a linear path. I had a lot of obstacles along my journey. And it's interesting that, Sasha, you've interwoven this with my motivators and my mentors, because absolutely, hands down, it was my mentors that I didn't even realize were mentors, that were motivators along my journey, until now, in retrospect, I look back and I say, oh, I learned from my mother throughout my youth, and she inspired me through the hardships we needed to face. And then through my, teen years, I was really inspired from my grandmother, who was before her time, and what she did professionally. And then, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was in a place where I was privileged enough, thankfully, to accept that. And I didn't try, for all the things that I sort of now wish I would have, based on the fact that I didn't know I could. And then I landed a really good job as a work study student, freshman year in college. And I landed in the president's office of Baruch. I don't know exactly how I did it, except maybe, I like talking and I like communicating, going back to where I wound up finding myself. And it led me to connections and networking, and I still wasn't sure. I, went through my undergrad with double majoring, double minoring. I just wanted to try everything. I actually really loved learning. I'm one of the people that I wasn't sure what I was going to do with a college degree, but I knew I wanted to be in a classroom. So I was happy to take everything I could. And then by the time I was done with my undergraduate degree, my boss, who I had shifted positions, was absolutely one of the biggest mentors in my life, who has since passed away. And I actually really do feel the loss of her presence very frequently. She helped guide me to understand what I was passionate about, because I do appreciate what you had shared, Victoria. You really should try to find yourself doing things you really love. All those things, if they line up, you love what you do, you love who you're doing it with, you're like a unicorn in a way, right? Because it's so special. So I wasn't sure. My path was not linear. I had a lot of different obstacles professionally and personally, which, based on the questions that we were sent ahead of time, you might hear a little bit about more. But it was absolutely the mentors along my journey that pushed me and inspired me and motivated me. And I didn't even realize it until I was past those points, the impact that they made. And then I would add the last motivators I have now at this point in my life. I have 2 daughters, and I really do take in the idea of being a younger or a middle-aged woman now. I have 2 young set of eyes watching what I do. And I've always valued working hard and persevering and being kind and being good and trying and learning and growing, but even more so now, when I want to embody that for them so that they can carry that forward. So yeah, that's where I am today.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to add, there's nothing wrong with having a non-linear path. I think like the best part about a life is enjoying the journey and not the destination. As cliche as that sounds, I'm always hearing it, and it's so true. Victoria, you can go next.
Sure. So I think what's sort of interesting about my career path is that, so I'm in, prevention science in public health, which pulls from a lot of the basic social sciences, psychology, anthropology, history. If you don't know the history of, how did we end up here? Why is maternal mortality? Why are there massive disparities in terms of maternal mortality? You need to know your history to understand the answer to that question. But the way that I conceptualized what I wanted to do was that it was research. And I didn't really think about academic research versus research that one could do at a health department or at a research organization. To me, it was just, I want to answer this question. I want to understand what are the determinants and distribution of intimate partner and sexual violence against women. Now I want to understand, how do we, reduce HIV stigma and homophobia as they intersect, so that we create healthier communities so people can come out and have sex the way they want to have sex, and maybe have HIV or not have HIV, but not experience stigma, right? So I just sort of was like, I wanted to go wherever I could answer the questions that were burning in my mind, but also were, hopefully going to create a better world, right? If we could get the answers. And of course, that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, so I worked at the health department when I started my master's or my doctoral program, for example, and I was working professionally in research, in science, in public health science during my master's program. And it never occurred to me I should not do that and actually become a graduate research assistant and become like fully enmeshed in academia. And I think that's something that has served me very well, because I never really thought of myself as a student or anyone's student, or I was taking classes and I was doing my own science. Like I was sort of like, I would have professors say, "What, you have a lot of papers, like you've written papers." And I'm like, "Yeah, the health department said I could do this analysis." So, I stayed late until midnight for 7 weeks in a row and I did it, and they're kind of like, "Okay." So I think that in a way, being in a professional setting, being professionalized was better for me, because I think academia is really problematic. That hierarchy and everything that goes with it can be challenging for some people. I was not the kind of person who would have done well, I think, in that setting. And I was so naive to like sort of the topography of it all that I didn't realize like how different it was. And so in my field, you can absolutely do what you want to do without being in academia. I mean, you can be in research institutes, you can be at health departments, you can do, some of the most important, impactful work on COVID is going on in health departments. It's coming out of the NIH labs. That is not an academic institution. I think, so I guess like my trajectory has been going to wherever I can do the kind of work I want to do, and not thinking about the prestige, I didn't do a postdoc. I went to my first job as an investigator, ABD. I didn't even know what a postdoc was, and I have no awards. Like I never, ever sought or put my name in or was told by anybody, you should try to get some awards or honors. Like I never even ticked the box for the abstract. Would you like your abstract? I didn't know what that was. So because I was doing it myself, like not under anybody's guidance. And I think that I don't recommend that path for everybody, but it's there. And if that's the kind of sort of person you are, you need to be a lot more independent. You're not good in a hierarchical like structure. You can, if there are places, and I know there's a lot of folks in the basic sciences here on the Zoom and maybe less so in the social sciences, but consider it. It's not as prestigious, right? When you get to academia, they sometimes are like, where are your awards? Where you didn't do a postdoc, and whatever, but it's just something to think about. So I think that's like my path is like all over the place. I went over here and then I went over there and I was there for 6 months. I've yet to work anywhere longer than 6 years. We'll see if I can stay here for another few years. That would be amazing. But yeah, so it's definitely non-traditional and definitely, just busy and interesting. So.
Thank you for sharing. Kendra, you were last. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, I've also had quite a meandering journey. I started off, I grew up here in the city and my parents are artists, and I actually went to art school for high school. I was a theater major. but I think I've always sort of liked to do juxtaposing things or contradictory things. So even while I was in high school, I started to do science research at the Museum of Natural History and got really into astrophysics. And so then, but I still wanted to do something kind of like hands-on and embodied in some way. So that's why I got into engineering, because people told me it would be more hands-on. Not that it really was. It was just more equations. But through that, yeah, I went to school, and then, or in my head, I think I also at that point in my life, I just wanted to try different things, kind of really out of the box things. And growing up in the city, I wanted to like get away from the city and like live in some kind of like suburban rural area and experience what that would be like. That seemed like this kind of crazy fantasy to me. And so I thought, you know, I'd get an engineering job, I'd be like all set up, I'd get paid money and be like, you know, have that American dream kind of thing. But I graduated and I got my bachelor's degree in like 2008, which is like, you know, the big big downturn before this last one. So there weren't a lot of jobs actually, even for engineers coming out at that time. So I was like, well, I guess the next best thing is grad school. And I again kind of bounced back and forth between where I wanted to put my engineering knowledge. Even originally I was still into like astronomy technology. I worked at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, I think, as Maruna mentioned. But then I took a class in microelectronics, got really into like the physics of electrons and semiconductors. So when grad school came around, I still really liked the Southwest. I'd done my worked at the observatory, which was in New Mexico, and fell in love with the Southwest. So I wanted to go there or Colorado, and they had a really good optics and nanostructures PhD program. So I was like, that sounds cool. I got really into like microelectronics, and I thought I would be an engineer doing computer hardware, but that didn't pan out. So I went to grad school, and that was, and also like I was never like a super good student, or never thought that I was. You know, I thought I was just like kind of like barely getting by the whole time. But I similarly to some of these ladies, like loved learning and just like I'm super curious about stuff, and like and about just like the bizarreness of how things work. So in grad school was tough though, because I had all these kind of crazy ideas that I wanted to study, but it's hard to get funding, you know, sometimes to do something out of your own curiosity. You kind of have to like follow what your advisor is doing, or like if there is some other grant that's on that kind of thing. And for me, you know, maybe as Victoria was mentioning, like there's other ways to do it, but I didn't know how to do it at that point, like on my own kind of, and still like have the money to do it and to stay in school. And I was in a PhD program, but you know, as Christine was saying, there's other things that came up that maybe we'll talk about later that I kind of got pushed out of the program. So, but while I was there, I started to think more existentially about like what the purpose of technology and engineering was all about, and I actually got a grant to do a research project. So I did do something on my own. I got my own grant to do a research project on the ethics of nanotechnology. And so that kind of like started to get into more of these, again, like existential questions. And I was like leading these dialogues and conversations around like more science philosophy. And so I didn't really quite know where to go from there though. And I wanted to get more into ethics and science, technology, society, but I didn't really have a lot of like guidance at that point in my life. So I left the program with my master's and was trying to figure out what to do. I was unemployed for like a year, and finally decided just to get an engineering job, which was actually really excellent for me because it kind of it made me for once actually feel like I was actually smart and capable of being an engineer. Like going from academia into industry, I was sort of like, wow, how does anything even get made in this world? So it's sort of surprising sometimes that, you know, how the level of you know of how I was kind of told that I wasn't smart enough in academia, but then coming into industry and realizing like I actually had all of this knowledge and that there were so many other people that actually have like a much higher level of incompetence that I was really amazed by. That I was just like, how is this working? But it was really great. Like I worked in a nanofabrication lab, and I ran a clean room facility kind of similar to the one that we have at the ASRC. And so that was good. But then again, all these existential questions started coming up. And then I got back into doing theater and got into like mindfulness and meditation. And I was like, man, what if we could do these things together? You know, what if we could like simultaneously learn about our external world and do these analytical processes while also informing our internal world and doing all of this internal work and observation and experimentation? Like, what could we create? Like, how could we be transformed both internally and externally? So I got bold and I like quit my job and I was like, I want to figure out how to do this. And so that was the beginning of like my For Love and Science platform that was all about kind of this contemplative model of doing science, of exploring our internal and external world. And that got me more into education and permaculture, urban agriculture, anti-oppression, facilitation, all these things. And then eventually, long story short, now doing the program at ASRC. And now I still kind of want to go back to school, but I don't quite know what it's going to be. Is it going to be education, or is it going to be engineering or science or philosophy? I don't know. So possibilities are endless.
I literally can't believe it's only the second question and I already have goosebumps from these answers. It's great because I just graduated college last year, so I'm still kind of like in the beginning phases of, self-discovery and my journey. So it's great to know that the best is yet to come. There's still so much more. That was really inspiring. Thank you for sharing. So the next question, as we know, March is Women's History Month. So this next question, it's kind of important to reflect on, womanhood, what it means to be a woman, and how far we've come from the past, and how much we can achieve in the future in terms of equality, equity. So this next question is kind of based on that. What would you say, what does being a woman mean to you? Whether that be in your career, whether it be as a woman in science in your respective field, or in your personal life, what does being a woman mean to you? We can start in reverse order this time. So we'll start with Kendra, and then we'll go to Victoria, Christine, and then Pinar.
Okay. First, I was going to respond to the person talking about jazz, who was a jazz major in biochemistry. Definitely, yeah. And these things help us make interesting connections in the way that we think about things. What does it mean to be a woman or femme identifying person for me? I mean, I guess, that's something that I generally struggle with. Like, what does that mean? And especially in the way that we define that in our changing and complex world, and what is like gender identity, and what does that mean to all of us personally? I think I've gone through my own different identity crises of relating in different ways and trying to understand that, and going through aspects of like non-binary isms and elements of that. I taught this workshop once about using the analogy of the particle and the wave from physics to think about how we can how sometimes, with light being both a particle and wave, and sometimes it acts like more like one and sometimes another. It's kind of a good analogy, I feel, sometimes for aspects of our own identity, that sometimes we want to be more solid in the way that we identify and be more defined and have like boundaries around those things, and like straight up be like, well, this is me and this is how I identify. But sometimes it's a little bit more amorphous, sometimes a little bit like less definable in those ways. But I think generally for me, I suppose maybe as an archetype, as a feminine archetype of feeling an ability to hold more of a holistic way of thinking, or like a complexity of thinking in ways that might be a little more nuanced, and like just to have that like container. I think of like some aspects of like feminine archetypes of like this sort of like womb space or like feminine space of being able to hold things. And so I think that that's something that I like to bring to any space that I'm in, of just like having an ability to hold complexity or hold nuance or hold contradictions, which is why I like to be in these spaces where there's like many different voices or perspectives. And I think if we're able to just like make space for those, not necessarily always like reconcile them or decide which one is right or wrong, but sometimes to just bear witness to it. And so I think for me, that's the best that I could come up with or think about in that way, what it means for me.
I love everything you just said. This is a really hard question to answer. My response is much more, I can't really say what does a woman mean to me, like in this space. It's just too complex. It's too loaded. But in terms of as a woman in science or professionally, it's been, being a member of a class of people who are systematically oppressed. And at every turn, there's a barrier, and it can be incredibly subtle. It can be overt and violent. But it's constant. Sorry, I don't want to depress all of the, young, hopeful people here, but I don't think I'm saying, I'm seeing the heads nod like, So, it's kind of sad that like, when you ask me this question, what does it mean to me? It means like, someone's trying to keep me down and my sister's down. On the other hand, it is also a common cause with other groups, members of groups that are also oppressed. And I understand that my oppression is, kind of unidimensional, right? Whereas theirs is intersectional and layered. And frankly, it's not the Olympics, I know, but worse. I'm going to say that for me personally, based on my experience. So, it's in that way, it gives me empathy and insight, and it's the fuel for the justice side of what I do, which is, the reason I research violence against women and HIV is because of gender oppression. That's the whole motivator. So, and then I do have 2 kids. I've been pregnant 6 times, like this concept of having the womb and the space. I love that. And if I had more time and emotional bandwidth, I could probably dig into that. But I love everything that you said. And I really love also, Kendra, that you emphasize this concept, like the femme identified, because the older I get and the more and more I work with people who identify differently on the gender spectrum, I'm more thinking it's about that, like the femme identification and tapping into those values and mindsets and beliefs, and that, and I don't believe in essentialism. So, but like then what you were born with, right? Whether it's equipment or, chromosomes or, so yeah, but I'll stop there.
So I know I'm next. I also, when I thought about this, I think I thought about all these questions. I said to myself, similar to what Victoria shared, like, how do I share this? How do I define this in this short time and space? Because essentially for me, when I think of, what does it mean to be a woman? I feel like has the potential to be like all encompassing. It's like everything, right? And I have the privilege to work in a place where we study biology, and I think about the creation of life. And I, similarly to like, I tell people, my grandmother was a nurse midwife, and I grew up learning about the beauty of women, but simultaneously seeing the discrimination and the harassment of women. And so, how do you make that a concise thought, right? And I don't know if I can either, but if I could try to, I would say, because of the additional obstacles that I have faced myself individually as a woman, and then have seen people that are similarly identifying as women go throughout their whole life. It's like, it's interesting you mentioned the word juxtaposition. It's one of my favorite words, Kendra, actually. It's like I study words and communication. That's where my science is. So I'm not a scientist like in biology, but I love certain words and what they mean. And juxtaposition is actually one of my favorite words. So when I think about being a woman and what it means to be a woman, I think about this juxtaposition of this beauty, of this sensitivity that we sort of have been told we need to carry, right? Little girls are, care for this doll, make sure the doll is fed and changed and play with the baby. But we have to carry this certain strength because of the shit that we have to go through. And when I think about what it means to be a woman, that's really what I think about.
Thank you. Finari, you can go next.
Sure. I was thinking more about this one very famous scientist, female scientist that I look up to. In one interview, she had said, if you're a woman, you cannot have a family, hobby, and a good job at the same time. You have to pick two. And to me, you know, a man, of course, would never, if that was a man, that would have never been a question, because men can have it all. Somehow we cannot have it all. And to me, being a woman means I show the world I can do it all. Not perfectly at all. Everything is about to collapse, of course, but you know, we can do it.
Thank you. That was a very hefty question, but I think you guys all did a really good job in answering it eloquently. This next question, I'm going to kind of go a little bit out of order because you touched upon sacrifice. I wanted to ask, did you have to make any personal sacrifices to be where you are today? If so, do you mind speaking about those sacrifices and what they mean to you, or how they have helped you in becoming the person you are today? Let's start with Victoria first.
Well, so this will be a little different. I actually sacrificed something professionally for my personal life, right? Which is not like, I think that's actually quite ubiquitous for women, right? We do that constantly. But, you know, I guess the idea, I also believe you can do it all, but maybe not at the same time. And, you know, the concept, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I also think, you know, there are some places that are going to help you do it all better than others, and you'll have to make less sacrifices. And identifying those characteristics of environments can be really challenging. But I actually went into academia the first time I went on the job market after being at the research institute that I was at for 5 years, that I didn't, you know, I was like, oh, this is great, but it's soft money and I'm going to have to be hustling for grants constantly. Let me see if I can go into a, you know, a state university type system, at least get some hard money. I had an early career development award. You know, it's a 5-year, it goes to the individual, not the institution. So I was quite portable. It's typically a marker for someone who might be, you know, successful in getting R level mechanisms from NIH. And so I applied to, I went on the market and I had 5 job offers, actually. I mean, I did really, really well. And I ended up going to CUNY School of Public Health when it just started. And almost as soon as I got there, I had the K award, and then the team of researchers that I had been working with, we got 2 more grants that I was a key co-investigator on. One of them, we had submitted this proposal 6 times. I had rewritten it 6 times, basically, with a bunch of, every time there was like a new cast of characters coming in and out. The other one was a really exciting HIV prevention intervention for straight Black men, which was unheard of and has never been replicated since then. And I got to the CUNY School of Public Health and I was just like, okay, so I have to do all these 3 studies and I have to advise all these students and I have to teach at night. I had a 6-month-old at home and I have to do all of this. I was like, oh no, this is not going to work. And I was really, really active in the public education activism community. And when I say active, I mean like easily 10 hours a week of volunteer time, and not like bake sales. I wrote policy briefs that were 5 pages long. We organized, we tried to, inform legislation. We organized press conferences and protests. I mean, it was during the Bloomberg years, and we were really pushing back against what was the privatization of public education. And I just thought to myself, I can't do all of this at once. And my science is actually going to suffer. Like I'm not going to be able to do the science because I'm always going to sacrifice my science for the student in front of me, for the students who need this. And I have to say, and this is sort of sad and depressing, but I was like, I can't stay in academia. I'm never going to do the science I want. And I'm never going to be able to do this activism that I feel so passionately about. And so I went back into a research setting where all you do is research, you do some service, but the service I was doing outside was plenty. Like they didn't care that much about service. They were just like, oh, wow, that's great that you do that you've been on the Community Education Council for 10 years or whatever. But so that's sort of the sacrifice. Was I sacrificed professionally to have the kind of life that I wanted. But I got back into academia and it worked out. So that's the marathon analogy or metaphor. Sorry.
Thank you for sharing. You often hear the opposite. People often sacrifice their personal lives for their professional lives. So it's very refreshing to hear that, you were mature enough to like see that what you wanted and you went for what you wanted. Pinar, you can go next.
Thank you. I would say my biggest sacrifice is, the guilt, feeling guilty at all times for not giving 100% at work and then not being 100% at home. So that part is kind of, you're losing, you can't give 100% to everything. And that part is a bit difficult to deal with, and kind of learning to deal with it. I guess it's not a sacrifice, but it's just something that comes with this being a woman and trying to, having a satisfying job and having a family. It just comes at a cost where, as I was saying, everything is like at the verge of collapse. It's just, that's how it feels.
Thank you. Kendra, you can go next.
Sure. Yeah, similarly, I was working, kind of doing freelance education, guest seminars, public speaking events, more in the science philosophy world. And I was living in Colorado and I had to come home. My father was in an accident, had a brain injury, and I had to sort of like totally uproot and come back and help take care of family. And he's doing fine now, but it was like a process of like realizing, of having to kind of, sometimes you have to disconnect from everything and a pathway. I thought that I was on this trajectory. I thought I was going to move to the Bay Area, and like they're really into like science, philosophy, and kind of, real more alternative thinking out there. And so I was seemed like I was on this path to go that way. And then suddenly like everything takes this other turn. And so I had to, and then kind of like reorient myself in New York. So that was kind of a big sacrifice and life change. Similarly, like again for family, and have always kind of have sort of played that role in my family. I don't have my own kids, but I have an auntie to 3 nieces and nephews, and have to kind of, I usually take them in the summer times and help my sister out, who's a single mom. So I've kind of played that role of sort of helping everybody out and making sure everyone's okay. I think would be my part of the sacrifice. And
Thank
other,
you.
I guess there are some like personal life things too that now in the past few years, as I've just worked a lot and then made other personal sacrifices, and now I'm still a single woman. But
So
positive and negative.
Christine, you can bring us home.
So I think for me, one of the most valuable things is time. And so when I thought about this, I definitely have sacrificed time with my family at times, to be more present professionally. And then there are times when I've had to do the opposite. I really, what Pinar shared, I feel very similarly. And I think that potentially going back to the idea of what does it mean to be a woman, like we're taught to really be like the caregivers and things like that more traditionally. So I fortunately wound up finding myself with a partner that was very supportive. And so I went forward with my career where he stayed home with our second child for some time. But that's not necessarily the norm. And when people heard that, some people were still surprised, even though, hopefully we're progressing more and more. But I always feel like, and I think it has to do with myself, where I want to get as close to the 100% dedication in all I do. So as I'm getting older, I'm learning the art of saying no more. Like I can't sign up to participate in this and help because I want to give 100% when I commit to something. But that's sometimes a bit unrealistic when you have so many balls in the air, right? So I know for sure that I have sacrificed time at different points, but what has really helped me throughout that is putting myself from an early age very aware of putting myself as best as I could in situations and environments and with people that would be supportive and offer me some of that flexibility. Like I have a wonderful history of bosses. As in academia, every 3 years is a different chair. I have, I knew, but that chair gets picked from the faculty who I love that I work with. I had a partner, like I just shared, that was willing to, take a back seat to my career, which you don't always see in the dynamic of the more traditional male-female roles. I have friends that will support me, even if I don't talk to them as regularly, because I've been fortunate enough, again, going back to that point of finding the people that would give me more of what I needed, allowed me to be more effective and efficient in the roles and the spaces that I'm a part of. And I think that has helped make things become more successful for me, but it's not always easy. You have to learn what works for you, and that does take time, right? So I'm finding myself being in a better place now. Yes, maybe the pandemic did help with that because it forced me to be home for a long time. So it made me reflect on what really matters and how to be there in that space, how to advocate for what I need, because the more I fill my own cup, I can pour into others. And so, I have sacrificed time. I think I've sacrificed more time personally with my loved ones than professionally. And maybe if I could do it all again, I would maybe even that out a little bit more. And the pandemic is what taught me that. I told my older one, she's 13, so she feels it a bit more than my younger one. And I have two alive. Victoria, I was pregnant though also 6 times. So when you shared that, I said, oh, I could share that out loud also. I said, one day, hopefully we look back and we think of this as the first time we actually got to be together. So it's sad that took this for that to happen, but time is absolutely, with the passing of my mother and different things that have happened, time is definitely something really valuable that I've had to sacrifice at times.
Thank you so much for sharing those personal stories. I do want to reiterate that we do want questions. So if you have questions, I'm talking to our audience now, definitely drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute. In the meantime, I'll just ask another question. I think I saw something on the chat. Okay. So I'll just ask this last question that we have prepared. Have you ever faced discrimination or microaggression during your career that surprised you? Or as a woman in science or in your respective field, did you always feel welcome or that you belonged? I know we talked about obstacles that we face as women, so this question just blends in perfectly with that. We can start with, let's start with Kendra.
Yeah, I think it was most pronounced for me when I was in graduate school, and like I said, I was trying to do kind of some out of the box things, and I was often told, even in classes that I took and doing like research papers on current work that was being done, that I had chosen topics that were maybe too difficult or complicated, and I should try, just try and looking at something simpler next time, or that this crazy experience in one of my quantum classes where we had to, come up with like kind of a theoretical possibility on some model. And my partner and I, like, we did this whole model that was like based on a waveguide that could be done with electrons. And our teacher like told us that it was impossible and it was the most ridiculous idea he'd ever heard. And I went to a talk at the ASRC like 2 years ago where somebody had done the exact thing that we had theorized like could be done. So I was just like, I felt at least like vindicated in my like literally like I knew it could be done. So I've had multiple times of people, or just even when I first started my my consulting business and was trying to do mindfulness trainings in scientific communities, and people thought it was this like kind of woo woo thing at that was like, almost 8 years ago. So mindfulness wasn't really as accepted yet. And so I got a lot of either like, okay, that's weird, or like, oh, that's sweet, good luck with that kind of talk. So I definitely had to deal with those kind of comments, or even that like, saying that I'm like gregarious, like think like sort of these like backhanded like compliments that are like trying to be like, I'm like, okay, all right. But you sometimes at different times you learn when it's the right opportunity to let it roll off, and when you can kind of come back and be like, no, like we talked, that was odd thing to say, just, and then they're like, oh, okay. So sometimes, you find the right opportunity to call it out, or have a conversation with other colleagues, or make it a learning opportunity.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Victoria.
So I've worked a lot of different jobs. I tried to work construction once in high school and was sexually harassed my first day and didn't return. I ended up finding a better job doing lawn maintenance, so it was all fine. But I've worked as a waitress and a bartender and as a paralegal, and I mean, like a lot of different jobs. And, pretty much every environment, there's been some either form of harassment, misconduct, or just general, like, discrimination, misogynistic, gendered expectations, sexualization in the workplace. And not just to me, but what I've observed, I mean, it's just like, I hate to say it, but it was, and again, I'm 52 years old. So I'm not, I'm much older than probably most of you. And it was a different, it was the 80s and 90s, and things have changed a lot, I mean, the movements, both the traditional feminist wave movements and the Me Too and everything has just changed a lot. But yeah, it was sort of like, yeah, there's been a lot. Like, I don't know where to start. But I think some of it, what I'll say is in academia, what I've noticed is that it's intersectional. It's sort of like, so for example, disciplinary favoritism, the hard sciences, the basic sciences over the social sciences, the sort of like diminution of the humanities, sometimes like things that I sometimes interpret as being gendered because women overpopulate or overrepresented in these fields. A lot of resistance to examining gender harassment and misconduct in certain fields. Whereas maybe in my field, which is female dominated, there's significantly less of a concern, like resistance to that. So there's like, in when we develop scales to measure discrimination, we actually will use old-fashioned and modern. Like there's an old-fashioned homophobia scale, and then there's the modern homophobia scale, right? And so these things evolve and they take on modern forms, and sometimes it reflects technology, right? Harassment now occurs digitally as opposed to, back in the 80s when we were just learning email, it didn't. So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, and a lot, but that it's evolved. And I think that evolution is what's tricky about that is it's really hard to characterize, it's hard to pin down, it's hard to interrupt. And it's much more subtle sometimes for women in academia and science. And I think that's what I'm really struggling with lately. I'll put it that way.
Thank you. I think because of time, I'm going to cut this short. I'm going to have Christine and Pinar answer this last question, kind of just to end on a positive note. Now that we've talked about discrimination and obstacles, how can we make strides to empower and increase participation of women or women minorities in science or your respective field for those of us who don't identify as women in science? What are some areas that we can target or make improvements in? So we can start with, let's go with Christine first, and then we'll end on Dr. Ayada.
So what's interesting is this does touch upon the last question, which is oftentimes I think awareness is key. And so that reverts back to people who deal with discrimination and harassment in ways where they might not even necessarily be aware. And I think that that touches upon the answer similarly for the question that you've asked, Sasha. I think that somehow, we need to make people aware of the different things that are out there to help them become better advocates for themselves, to empower people that for whatever reason have doubt ingrained in them, as we all do, in different levels and from different, things that we feel, or to have doubt instilled in us from different experiences that we go through. Maybe making people aware of the different resources that are there, but then, creating access for them to get to be able to use those things, to take the things that are out there and to make it so that it's accessible for the different individuals that would benefit the most from it, right? So it's not just, these are a bunch of panels, these are a bunch of workshops. It's how do you get the people that potentially need those pieces of information the most? How do you get those resources to them? And I think that that's clutch in a lot of different things that us as women in the CCNY Women in Science group can do in the upcoming year. It's actually something I'm already thinking about. And to also just mention, Victoria, Dr. Fry is also one of the advisors for the CCNY Women in Science group. So this is something that, I think I've been thinking about, because we do so many wonderful things. Like we created this safe and brave space statement, but sending an email when we were all already receiving thousands of emails a day, things can get lost that are so important and valuable. So how do we figure out ways to get information in an accessible way to the people that would benefit the most from it is something that I'm thinking about. And I don't necessarily have an answer. I think that you were asking a question that I might say I'm thinking about that, but I don't necessarily have a concrete answer just yet. But I know something that I'm thinking about that I think would benefit that question.
Thank you. And Dr. Ayada, you want to end us off?
One of the things I think that really creates like quick change is having allies or making noise, calling out discrimination. For instance, using social media. There are these scientific events where all the participants are white male, and having an ally that will say, hey, I'm not participating in this because it's a manel, it's not a panel. So it's like, you know, so I think this will really change things a bit faster than, you know, when you are being discriminated against and you trying to change it, it's a bit different.
Thank you. That is so important. Calling it out and recognizing what's wrong versus what's right. That's so important. If there aren't any more questions in the chat, I don't think I see any. I know Kendra shared something in the chat, some resources, so you might want to take a look at that. Is there any other questions?
Seems to have a question. Sorry, Sasha.
Yes. Okay.
I have a question. Is it okay? Is it my turn? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing like such inspiring stories about your experiences. And also just this panel feels really comfortable, which is why I'm going to ask this question. Do you have advice on like how to navigate taking a leave for like a family leave, kind of seemingly interrupting your studies at a pivotal point to and then like how to come back? I know that's like sounds vague. I'll just come out and say it. So I'm pregnant right now.
Congratulations.
I was going to tell you, Christine. So yeah, and I'm going to have to take a leave. I haven't figured any of this out yet. Okay. But I'm going to have to take a leave in September and then kind of work out how I'm going to do all of that. So I'm wondering, you seem like the perfect panel to give some advice on how to navigate that. So
I might start because we work together in this way and I might be of help in processing some of this. So first and foremost, I think, you know, we all said congratulations. We all,
thanks.
You know, so, and also I will share, if I may, oftentimes people are feeling anxiety or nervous when they are feeling most vulnerable, and it might help you to know what it is that you're going through is not very unique. People have taken leaves from eons for doing the exact same thing that you're going to be embarking on. I would say what might help as a good starting point is so I know, Elizabeth, so I know that you work, so you might want to start with the Graduate Center to find out the formal policy on taking a leave if you haven't done that yet. And if you want to email me, I'm happy to help you. I am an administrator, right? So I sometimes will be a point person where if I don't know the answer, I'll help find out the information for the person in a confidential way. So if you want to reach out to me, I can find out information to find out what the formal policies are. In an informal way, I would say if you feel comfortable, you would have a conversation with your PI to let them know what you're thinking once you are equipped with the information that you are safeguarding yourself with. Now, not everybody, now just talking about this in a general way, not directed specifically at you, there are times I think it's important for us to recognize where we don't have supportive environments, when people find themselves where they need to advocate for themselves and they might not be supported. So what do you do in those instances, right? Let's take this as a learning moment. You find out what the policies are so that you can figure out what it is that you need to do, and then see who, you know, as Pinar mentioned, the allies around you that could help you through the process. There is power in numbers, absolutely. In your case, again, it's not a unique thing. It might not happen as often, but it's not unique. It has happened. There will be policies in place. And then professionally speaking, I think that I've been there myself. I've needed to take leaves at different points in my life for different reasons. And you find your way back from where you left off. There is no like, if you leave on page 22, you're going to open back up to page 23 and start. That's not what happens, especially in science, things evolve. So while you're taking your leave, things might change and they evolve. But again, going back to what I shared in the very beginning, I'm all for open communication so long as it doesn't make you be in a vulnerable or unsafe space. So let's find out the policies and then communicate about what it is that you need. And you will find people along your journey that will support you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a really great answer, Christine. Thank you for asking that question, Elizabeth, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
I think we are good. I don't see any questions in the chat. I just want to thank our panelists for, speaking and answering these questions so enthusiastically. Thank you so much. I just want to give a little shameless plug for our next event, which is next month in April. It's going to be during the Week of Science. So definitely stay tuned for that. I think we're going to wrap it up. So have a great day. I think Christine has something to say.
Yes, save the date, not just be on the lookout. April 25th, 7 p.m. Picture of Science, this panel. We're going to send out more information, indeed, with access to watch the documentary. And then we're going to have a panel with 2 of the Women in Science board members and then 2 others. But Picture a Scientist, April 25th, 7 p.m. on Zoom. Please save the date. And once we get out the flyer, please spread the word.
Yeah, and
sorry, Kendra, go ahead.
The things that I dropped this Friday, we're having an open house for undergraduates to learn more about research opportunities at the Advanced Science Research Center. So you can register for that. It's a luncheon. And then also there's a scholarship opportunity to do summer research for Femmes in Science. So apply for that if you want to do research this summer.
Kendra, I'm going to email you because we're doing a Division of Science Student Council opportunity fair on the 29th. And if you or someone else or anybody here has any opportunity, I'll reach out to the whole panel. If there's any opportunities you want to present, that's also on Zoom. I'd love for you all to join.
Yeah.
Networking at its finest.
Feel free to share with your groups, student groups, all those 2 things.
I also want to say that I can listen to you for hours, to every single one of you. It is just so inspirational. It never gets old. Like it is fantastic to hear, like, and to be so comfortable. Like Liz said, it is fantastic. And thank you so much, all of you, for your time, because at the end of the day, like we said, like Christine mentioned, time is the most valuable thing. And I am genuinely very happy that you agreed to spend this time with us. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that and for everything that you do on a daily basis.
Thank you.
And so we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Thank you
all
so
of
much.
you. Thank you
Have a
so
good
much. Thank you,
evening.
Sasha, for your help, and Naomi, who organized. And thank you.